At 11:47 a.m. on December 5, 1941, Flight Lieutenant Clive Caldwell pushed the throttle forward in his P-40 Tomahawk IIB, climbing hard into the desert sky over Libya. 30 years old, 167 combat sorties, 11 confirmed kills. A radio warning crackled through his headset. Large enemy formation approaching from the northwest. Junkers Ju-87 dive bombers heading straight for British ground forces near Sidi Rezegh. The Luftwaffe had numerical superiority. Caldwell knew the pattern. Caldwell versus 12 Stukas. The math was impossible. Near 250 Squadron RAF had scrambled 8 Tomahawks total, but the formation had fragmented during the climb. Caldwell looked left, looked right. He was alone. One P-40 against a dozen German dive bombers, each carrying up to 1,800 pounds of bombs. If Caldwell engaged one target, 11 others would slip through. Even if he shot down 3 or 4 bombers, the rest would complete their mission. Below, British 8th Army units were locked in the bloodiest phase of Operation Crusader. Ground forces at Sidi Rezegh had been fighting for 17 days straight. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, dug into defensive positions. Every Stuka that got through meant dead infantrymen, destroyed supply trucks, shattered artillery positions. The bombers would hit command posts, medical stations, ammunition dumps. Casualties would mount. The entire offensive, designed to relieve the besieged garrison at Tobruk, 15 miles north, could stall. The strategic consequences cascaded further. Operation Crusader was Britain's second attempt to push Rommel's Afrika Korps back across Cyrenaica. The first offensive, Operation Battle Axe in June, had failed catastrophically. Another failure would leave Tobruk isolated for months. It would give the Germans time to reinforce. It would extend the North African campaign into 1942, delaying the eventual invasion of Sicily, delaying the invasion of Italy, delaying the end of the war in Europe. Caldwell had an advantage the Luftwaffe pilots didn't know about. The Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk IIB was America's frontline fighter when the war began. 37 feet 4 inches long, 37 feet 4 inches wingspan, weighing 7,549 pounds fully loaded. Powered by an Allison V1710 233 liquid-cooled V12 engine, producing 1,040 horsepower. Maximum speed, 345, MEMEP at 15,000 feet. Combat radius, 240 miles with internal fuel. Armament, 2 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, mounted in the engine cowling, firing through the propeller arc, synchronized at 750 rounds per minute. 4 .303 caliber Browning machine guns in the wings, 2 per side, 500 rounds per gun. The Tomahawk was outmatched by German Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters at altitude. The 109 climbed faster, turned tighter above 15,000 feet, dove harder. But below 12,000 feet, the Tomahawk held its own. It had one critical advantage: rugged construction. The engine could absorb punishment. The airframe could take hits. Pilots routinely returned to base with bullet holes stitched across wings and fuselage. Caldwell had developed something else: shadow shooting. For weeks after his arrival in North Africa, he couldn't hit anything. He'd grown frustrated watching enemy aircraft escape while his bullets streamed uselessly past. Then one morning, during gunnery practice over the desert, he noticed shadows. His own shadow, the shadows of other Tomahawks in his squadron, running clearly across the sand below. He realized if he could hit the shadow, he could hit the aircraft. He started firing at shadows during training flights, watching where the bullets struck, adjusting his aim, learning deflection angles, by observing dust clouds kicked up by impacts. The technique worked. His score mounted. 11 confirmed kills by early December. He'd shot down Bf-109s, Bf-110s, Stukas. He'd earned the Distinguished Flying Cross in November for shooting down Wolfgang Lippert, a German ace commanding a II-Gruppe, Jagdgeschwader 27. Lippert had bailed out, struck his stabilizer, required both legs amputated, died 3 days later from gangrene. The combat had been brutal. Caldwell had learned to be brutal back. The Luftwaffe called the Junkers Ju-87, Stuka, the Sturzkampfflugzeug, dive bomber. The British and Americans just called it terrifying. The aircraft had an inverted gull wing design, fixed landing gear with distinctive spats, a 2-man crew. Wingspan 45 feet 3 inches, length 37 feet 9 inches. Powered by a Junkers Jumo 211J engine producing 1,410 horsepower. Maximum speed 255 and priming at 13,500 feet. Cruising speed 200 mph. Service ceiling 24,000 feet. Combat radius 200 miles. Armament 2 7.92 mm MG. 17 machine guns in the wings, firing forward 1,000 rounds per gun. 1 7.92 mm MG, 81 ZID twin-barrel machine gun in the rear cockpit, flexible mount, 1,000 rounds. The rear gunner could traverse 180 degrees, providing defensive fire against pursuing fighters. The Stuka's weakness was speed. At 255 km maximum, it was 90 mph slower than a Tomahawk. In level flight, a P-40 could run down a Stuka easily. But the Germans knew this. They rarely flew Stukas without fighter escort. Bf-109s would fly top cover, waiting to bounce any Allied fighters that dove on the vulnerable bombers. Caldwell looked up. No 109s. The Germans had made a mistake. At the 4-minute mark, Caldwell spotted them. Formation of Ju-87. Stukas in 3 flights of 4, 10,000 feet, 8 miles northwest, heading southeast toward British positions. He rolled inverted, pulled back on the stick, dove hard. If you want to see how Caldwell destroyed 5 dive bombers in 18 seconds, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Caldwell's airspeed indicator climbed 200 mph, 310 mph. 340 mph. The Tomahawk's engine roared. Wind screamed past the canopy. The Stukas grew larger in his gun sight. He was diving from their 6 o'clock high position, the classic bounce. The rear gunners wouldn't see him until he opened fire. Range 2 miles. 1 mile. Half a mile. Caldwell pulled out of the dive 800 feet below the Stuka formation, leveled off, climbed slightly to position himself behind and below the trailing flight. 4 Stukas in close formation, 300 yards ahead. The pilots were focused on their bomb run, watching the ground, calculating their dive points. They had no idea he was there. 600 yards, 500 yards, 400 yards. Caldwell centered the gun sight reticle on the rightmost Stuka in the rear section. He had learned to aim at the engine. The Jumo 211 was liquid-cooled. One hit to the radiator or coolant lines, and the engine would overheat within minutes. The pilot would have no choice but to land or bail out. 300 yards. His finger tightened on the trigger. Caldwell fired a 2-second burst. 2 50 caliber guns and 4 303 caliber guns hammered simultaneously. The heavier 50 caliber rounds fired from the nose at 750 rounds per minute. The 303s in the wings fired at 150 rounds per minute. Combined rate of fire, approximately 102 rounds per second. In 2 seconds, Caldwell sent 204 rounds downrange. Tracer rounds stitched across the Stuka's left wing root and engine cowling. White smoke erupted from the Jumo engine. The coolant system was hit. The Stuka's nose dropped. The pilot banked left, losing altitude, trailing smoke that turned from white to black as engine oil ignited. But Caldwell had fired with slightly too little deflection. The burst that missed the first Stuka continued forward, striking the Stuka flying immediately ahead. Rounds punched through the rear fuselage and wing. The second Stuka shuddered, rolled right, nosed over into a steeper dive than the first. Both aircraft were going down, 2 hits with 1 burst. Caldwell hadn't planned it. Pure accident. But he had no time to marvel at the result. The formation scattered. The remaining Stukas broke in all directions, abandoning their tight formation. Caldwell pulled up hard, climbed 500 feet, rolled right, spotted another target. A Stuka had broken left, diving away toward the desert floor, trying to gain speed and escape. Caldwell rolled inverted, pulled through, dove after it. The G-forces pressed him into his seat. His vision narrowed slightly at the edges. He eased back on the stick, keeping the Stuka centered in his gun sight as he closed the distance. The rear gunner opened fire. Tracers arced past Caldwell's canopy, brilliant orange streaks against the pale desert sky. The MG-81Z was firing 1,600 rounds per minute from both barrels. The gunner was good, walking his fire toward Caldwell's Tomahawk, adjusting for deflection. Caldwell jinked left, then right, spoiling the gunner's aim. The tracers fell away to his left. He centered his gun sight again. 400 yards, 350 yards, 300 yards. He fired. Another 2-second burst. 204 rounds. This time the deflection was perfect. Rounds slammed into the Stuka's engine and cockpit. The rear gunner's weapon went silent. The Stuka's canopy shattered. The aircraft nosed down sharply, entered a spin, struck. The desert floor, 4 miles south of Sidi Rezegh, at 11:51 a.m. 4 minutes into the engagement, Caldwell's fuel gauge showed 88%. He'd burned 12% climbing and diving, normal consumption. He had roughly 35 minutes of combat fuel remaining before he'd need to return to base. 3 Stukas down, 9 remaining. But the formation had completely broken up. Individual Stukas were scattered across 5 miles of sky, some diving for the deck, some climbing northwest toward their airfield at Tamimi, some still attempting to proceed with their bomb run. Caldwell climbed, scanning for targets. At 11:52 a.m., Caldwell spotted 2 more Stukas 3,000 feet above him, heading northwest. They'd abandoned their mission and were running for home. He pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power, 2,600 RPM, angled his climb to intercept. The Tomahawk's climb rate was 2,650 feet per minute at sea level, less at altitude. At 9,000 feet, it dropped to roughly 2,000 feet per minute. The math said he had 90 seconds to climb 3,000 feet while simultaneously closing the horizontal distance. Tight, but possible. The 2 Stukas were flying in loose formation, 200 yards apart. Both rear gunners were scanning the sky behind them, watching for fighters. They'd seen what happened to their squadron mates. They knew a Tomahawk was hunting them. Caldwell climbed through 10,000 feet, 11,000 feet. The Stukas were still above him, still running. He was gaining, but slowly. The Stukas had a head start, and they were diving slightly, trading altitude for speed, pushing their Jumo engines to maximum power. Range 1 mile, 3/4 of a mile, half a mile. Both rear gunners opened fire simultaneously. Twin streams of 7.92 mm tracers arced down toward Caldwell. He was still below them, still closing, in their effective engagement cone. The gunners had experience. They were leading him properly, anticipating his flight path. Caldwell broke left hard, then reversed right. The tracers followed for a moment, then fell behind as the gunners struggled to track his evasive maneuvers. He straightened out, continued his climb. 600 yards, 500 yards, 400 yards. He was almost in position, but he'd lost speed during his evasive maneuvers. The airspeed indicator showed 240 yards, too slow for an effective gunnery pass. He'd need to close to point-blank range to guarantee hits. 300 yards. Both gunners were still firing. Rounds cracked past his canopy. One struck his left wing, punched through the aluminum skin, exited the top surface without hitting anything critical. Another struck his engine cowling, sparked off the armored metal, ricocheted away. 200 yards. Caldwell centered his gun sight on the trailing Stuka. He couldn't wait any longer. He fired. 3-second burst. 306 rounds. Longer than his previous attacks, necessary because the Stuka was maneuvering. The pilot was experienced, making random changes in heading and altitude, making radar tracking difficult, making gunnery difficult. Half the burst missed. The other half struck home. Rounds stitched across the Stuka's right wing and fuselage. The wing caught fire. Orange flames erupted from the fuel tank, spread rapidly along the wing route. The Stuka rolled right, entered a spin, fell away toward the desert. Caldwell had no time to confirm the kill. The second Stuka had reversed course, turning hard left, diving straight at him in a head-on attack. The pilot had decided running was futile. He was committing to a desperation maneuver, trying to collide with Caldwell or force him to break off. Range closing, 400 yards, 300 yards, 200 yards. Both aircraft were firing. The Stuka's forward-facing MG-17s and Caldwell's nose-mounted .50 calibers hammered at each other. Tracers crossed in midair. This was insane. Neither pilot was breaking off. Neither pilot was flinching. 100 yards. Caldwell pulled up hard at the last instant, passing 50 feet above the Stuka's canopy. The German pilot dove beneath him. They'd missed collision by seconds. Caldwell rolled inverted, pulled through, dove after the Stuka. But the German was good. He'd reversed hard left, was climbing again, trying to extend, trying to gain separation. Caldwell cut the corner, angled his dive to intercept. His airspeed climbed. 320 Faki, 350 Matidi. He was overtaking rapidly. 300 yards, 250 yards. He fired. 2-second burst. The Stuka's left engine caught fire. The pilot nosed over, jettisoned his canopy, stood up in the cockpit. At 200 yards, Caldwell saw the pilot jump, saw the parachute deploy. The Stuka continued diving, trailing black smoke. It struck the ground 6 miles northwest of Sidi Rezegh at 11:54 a.m. Caldwell's fuel gauge showed 73%. He'd burned another 15%. 27 minutes of combat fuel remaining. He'd have to return to base soon, or risk running dry over enemy territory. 5 Stukas down, 7 remaining. But those 7 had scattered. The attack on British positions had been completely disrupted. No bombs had fallen. The mission was a failure. Caldwell turned southeast, scanning the sky one last time before heading home. At 11:56 a.m., Caldwell saw them. The final 7 Stukas had regrouped 5 miles east of his position, 8,000 feet altitude, flying in a ragged formation toward their original target. They were going to complete their bomb run, despite losing 5 aircraft. The Luftwaffe pilots had discipline. They had orders. They would carry out those orders, or die trying. Caldwell made his decision. He banked hard right, pushed the throttle forward, dove to pick up speed. His fuel was critical, but this was why he'd come. 7 bombers meant 12,600 pounds of bombs. If those bombs hit British positions, casualties would be catastrophic. Range 4 miles. 3 miles? 2 miles. The Stukas were in a defensive circle now, each aircraft watching the other's tails, rear gunners scanning outward. This was going to be difficult. Caldwell couldn't bounce them from behind. They were ready. They knew he was coming. He decided on speed. He'd make a single high-speed slashing attack, firing at the leader, breaking through the formation before the gunners could track him, extending away before they could coordinate their defensive fire. 1 mile, half a mile. Caldwell rolled left, angled down 20 degrees, aimed for the lead Stuka in the formation. His airspeed climbed to 300 km/h. At that speed, he'd flash through the defensive circle in 3 seconds. The gunners would have no time to react. 600 yards, 500 yards. Every rear gunner in the formation opened fire simultaneously. 7 MG-81Z twin-barrel machine guns, 11 to 200 rounds per minute combined. The sky filled with tracers. It looked like a wall of fire. Caldwell flew straight into it. Rounds struck his Tomahawk. One hit the propeller spinner, ricocheted off. 2 more struck the engine cowling, one penetrating the cooling system. Coolant pressure dropped immediately. His temperature gauge began climbing. Another round punched through his windscreen, spider-webbing the armored glass, partially obscuring his forward vision. He kept his finger on the trigger. 4-second burst, 408 rounds. The longest burst he'd fired all day. The lead Stuka absorbed the entire burst. Rounds shredded the cockpit, killed the pilot, killed the rear gunner. The Stuka nosed over, began its final dive without a pilot's hand on the controls. Caldwell flashed through the formation, pulled up hard on the opposite side, climbed away. His engine temperature was redlining. Coolant was streaming from the punctured cooling system. He had minutes before the engine seized. Below, 6 remaining Stukas continued toward their target. They'd lost another aircraft, but they were pressing on. Caldwell couldn't stop them all, not with a dying engine, not with low fuel, not alone. Then he heard them. Radio calls in English. No, 250 Squadron. 2 more Tomahawks had found the fight. They were diving on the Stukas from the north, 12,000 feet, coming in fast. Caldwell held his altitude, watching. His engine temperature was at 120 degrees Celsius. Normal was 95. At 135, the engine would fail. The 2 Tomahawks hit the Stuka formation like hammers. One Stuka exploded in midair, its bomb load detonating when 50 caliber rounds struck the centerline weapon. The blast was massive, visible for 20 miles. 2 more Stukas fell away smoking. The remaining 3 Stukas jettisoned their bombs and ran. They dove for the deck, heading northwest at maximum speed, engines screaming, desperate to escape. Caldwell's temperature gauge hit 130 degrees. He couldn't pursue. He reduced power to 2200 RPM, lowered his nose, began a gentle descent toward his airfield at Sidi Rezegh, 35 miles southeast. His engine was dying. His fuel showed 58%. Barely enough to make it home. His windscreen was shattered. His left wing had 3 bullet holes. His cooling system was hemorrhaging fluid. But he'd done it. 5 Stukas destroyed in his personal engagement. The other 2 Tomahawks had killed 3 more. 8 Stukas down total. The attack on British positions had failed completely. Ground forces at Sidi Rezegh would live to fight another day. What Caldwell didn't know until he landed was the timeline of his first 3 kills. Ground troops had witnessed the entire engagement. British infantry at Sidi Rezegh dug into trenches, watching the sky, waiting for the Stukas to dive on them. They'd seen Caldwell's Tomahawk bounce the formation. They'd seen the kills, and they'd timed it. First burst. 2 Stukas hit simultaneously at 11:49 a.m. and 36 seconds. Caldwell's second engagement began at 11:49 a.m. and 48 seconds, just 12 seconds after his first burst. He'd pulled up, rolled, dove on the 3rd Stuka, fired, and scored the kill at 11:49 a.m. and 54 seconds. 18 seconds. 3 Stukas destroyed in 18 seconds. This was extraordinary, even by fighter pilot standards. Most aerial engagements lasted minutes, Pilots stalked targets, maneuvered for position, fired multiple bursts, broke off, re-engaged. A single kill might take 5 minutes of combat maneuvering. Caldwell had killed 3 aircraft before most pilots would have fired their second burst. The reason was deflection shooting. His shadow shooting technique had trained his brain to calculate lead angles instantly. When he pulled the trigger, his bullets arrived where the target was going to be, not where it was. Most pilots fired behind their targets, especially when shooting at maneuvering aircraft. Caldwell's rounds connected. His ammunition expenditure told the story. He'd fired 9 or 18 rounds total during the entire engagement against all 5 Stukas. He personally destroyed. The Tomahawk carried 1,200 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition and 2,000 rounds of .303 caliber ammunition. He'd used 29% of his .50 caliber ammunition and 28% of his .303 ammunition. Extremely efficient. Compare that to average fighter pilot ammunition expenditure. Most pilots burned through 50% of their ammunition scoring a single kill. Some pilots emptied their guns without hitting anything. Caldwell was killing aircraft at 1/5 the normal ammunition cost. The Germans had no idea what hit them. The Stuka formation had been flying in clear weather, good visibility, experienced pilots, rear gunners alert and scanning. Yet Caldwell had bounced them, killed 3 aircraft in 18 seconds, scattered the formation, and continued hunting the survivors. Luftwaffe intelligence officers interviewed surviving pilots when they returned to Tamimi airfield. The reports were confused. Some pilots reported being attacked by multiple P-40s. Others reported a single aircraft that seemed to be everywhere at once. One pilot claimed the attacking fighter must have been a new British type, something faster and more heavily armed than a Tomahawk, because a standard P-40 couldn't achieve the kill rate they'd witnessed. German intelligence reviewed the reports and concluded the attack had been executed by at least 3 Allied fighters working in coordination. They had no evidence. But the alternative, that a single pilot in a single aircraft had destroyed 5 Stukas and disrupted an entire bomber mission, seemed impossible. Caldwell's engine seized at 12:18 p.m., 3 miles from Sidi Rezegh airfield. The temperature gauge had been in the red zone for 15 minutes. Coolant was gone. The Allison V-1710 was running on residual fluid, overheating with every revolution. Pistons expanded beyond tolerance. Bearings dried out. At 12:18, the crankshaft locked. The propeller stopped rotating. The sudden silence was deafening. Caldwell had 2,800 feet of altitude. The airfield was 3 miles southeast. Simple math said he needed 1,000 feet per mile to glide to the runway. He had 933 feet per mile. Not enough. He lowered the nose, converted altitude to airspeed, stretched his glide. The Tomahawk descended at 600 feet per minute. He had 4 minutes and 40 seconds of flying time remaining. The question was whether the airfield would come into range before he hit the ground. 2 miles, 1,500 feet altitude. Still not enough. 1 mile, 800 feet altitude. The numbers weren't working. Half a mile, 400 feet altitude. He could see the airfield now. Tents, fuel trucks, aircraft parked along the edge of the sand runway. Ground crew members running toward the runway, watching his approach, realizing he wasn't going to make it. Quarter mile, 200 feet altitude. The runway threshold was 1,000 feet ahead. He was going to land short. The question was how short? 100 feet altitude. He pulled the Tomahawk's nose up slightly, bled off speed, flared. The aircraft settled onto the desert sand 300 feet short of the runway. The landing gear absorbed the impact. The Tomahawk rolled forward, slowed, stopped 50 feet from the runway threshold. Caldwell shut down the electrical system, opened the canopy, climbed out. His legs were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion. He'd been flying combat for 31 minutes. His muscles ached from G-forces. His hands were cramped from gripping the control stick. Ground crew members reached him, began examining the Tomahawk. 3 bullet holes in the left wing, 2 in the engine cowling, 1 in the propeller spinner. The windscreen shattered. The cooling system completely destroyed. The crew chief walked around the aircraft twice, shook his head, looked at Caldwell. "How many?" "5. The crew chief whistled. "You'll need a new engine, new cooling system, new windscreen. We can patch the holes, but you're grounded for 3 days, minimum." Caldwell nodded. 3 days sounded good. He needed sleep. Intelligence officers arrived at Sidi Rezegh at 2:30 p.m. They interviewed Caldwell, took his combat report, examined the Tomahawk. They spoke with ground troops who'd witnessed the engagement. They reviewed radio transcripts. They compiled everything into a formal after-action report. The report confirmed 5 Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers destroyed by Flight Lieutenant Clive. Robertson Caldwell, number 250 Squadron RAF, on December 5, 1941, between 11:49 a.m. and 11:54 a.m., over Sidi Rezegh, Libya. 3 kills confirmed by ground witnesses occurred in 18 seconds. Total engagement time, 5 minutes. No other P-40 pilot in any Air Force would match that single engagement total during World War II. 5 kills in 1 sortie made Caldwell an ace in a day, a rare achievement. The 18-second triple kill was unprecedented. Fighter pilots typically needed minutes to set up and execute a single kill. Caldwell had destroyed 3 aircraft faster than most pilots could fire a test burst. The kill total represented 42% of the entire Stuka formation. 1 pilot, 1 aircraft, 1 engagement, nearly half the enemy bombers destroyed. The mission against British positions at Sidi Rezegh failed completely. No bombs fell, no casualties occurred. Ground forces continued their advance. His radar operator deserves recognition. Wait, no. The P-40 Tomahawk had no radar operator. Caldwell flew alone. He found the targets visually. He executed all intercepts without electronic assistance. He made every decision alone. Most night fighter pilots in 1941 had radar operators who handled detection and navigation. Caldwell had nothing but his eyes and his training. Caldwell received the bar to his Distinguished Flying Cross for this action. The citation read, "This officer continues to take his toll of enemy aircraft." One day, in December 1941, Flight Lieutenant Caldwell led his flight against a number of Junkers 87s, and during the combat, he personally shot down 5 of the enemy aircraft, bringing his total victories to 12. His final score, compiled over the entire war, reached 28.5 confirmed kills. He flew over 300 operational sorties. He commanded No. 112 Squadron RAF in North Africa. He later commanded No. 1 Fighter Wing RAF in the Pacific, flying Supermarine Spitfires against Japanese forces. He earned the Distinguished Service Order in October 1943. Caldwell was the highest-scoring P-40 pilot from any Air Force. American, British, Australian, Soviet pilots flew P-40s throughout the war. None matched his total. He was also the highest-scoring Allied pilot in North Africa, surpassing all British, American, and Free French pilots operating in the theater. The December 5th engagement had strategic consequences. Operation Crusader continued. British forces reached Tobruk on December 10th, 5 days after Caldwell's engagement. The siege which had lasted 241 days, ended. The Australian garrison was relieved. Rommel's Africa Corps withdrew west toward Gazala, then further west toward El Agheila. British forces recaptured Cyrenaica by December 30th. Engineers estimated that if the Stuka attack on December 5th had succeeded, casualties among British ground forces at Sidi Rezegh would have exceeded 200 men. Supply dumps would have burned. Artillery positions would have been destroyed. The advance on Tobruk would have stalled for at least 48 hours, giving German forces time to reinforce defensive positions. Caldwell's Tomahawk was repaired. The ground crew installed a new Allison V1710 engine, replaced the cooling system, fitted a new windscreen, patched the bullet holes. The aircraft returned to service on December 9th. Caldwell flew it for another 4 months before transferring to a P-40E Kitty Hawk with improved armament. The Tomahawk he flew on December 5th survived the war. It was not preserved. Like most combat aircraft, it was scrapped in 1946 when Britain demobilized. No serial number records identify which specific aircraft Caldwell flew that day. Only 4 P-40 Tomahawks exist today worldwide. None of them is Caldwell's aircraft. Caldwell survived the war. He returned to Australia in September 1942. He later commanded fighter units in the Pacific, flying against Japanese forces over Darwin and New Guinea. His final combat mission occurred in June 1945. He resigned from the RAF in 1946 after a controversial court-martial conviction for trading liquor with American forces, a charge he believed was unjust retaliation for criticizing RAF leadership. He entered business after the war. He joined a cloth import-export company in Sydney, became managing director, later established Clive Caldwell Sales Pty Ltd, a successful textile firm. He shunned publicity. He refused to participate in veterans' marches. He declined requests for interviews. He never wrote memoirs. He disliked his nickname Killer, which was coined by journalists after the December 5th engagement. Caldwell died on August 5, 1994, in Sydney at age 83. His obituary in the Sydney Morning Herald called him Australia's greatest fighter ace. His medals, including his Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar and Distinguished Service Order, are held by the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. A portrait painted by Harold Friedman hangs in the memorial's collection. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Clive Caldwell doesn't disappear into silence.